What if a simple change in your diet could stop the pain that keeps you up at night? It was another sleepless night for Sarah Davis, her legs cramping violently as she woke up from a deep sleep. The sharp, piercing pain shot up her calf like an electric current, pulling her awake in a cold sweat. She gasped, struggling to straighten her leg, but the cramp wouldn't let go. The tension in her muscles felt unbearable as she tried to stretch, her fingers digging into the sheets as she fought against the relentless ache. After what felt like an eternity, the cramp finally started to loosen, but the damage had already been done. She lay there, staring up at the ceiling, wondering how much longer she could endure this silent torment. It wasn't just a one-time thing. This had been happening for weeks now, and every night seemed to bring a new wave of frustration. Sarah had been dealing with leg cramps for years, but in the past few months, they had become more frequent, more intense, and more debilitating. Sometimes, they came without warning, leaving her breathless in the middle of the night. Other times, they lingered for hours, leaving her with sore muscles that didn't seem to recover. She tried everything she could think of, stretching before bed, massaging her legs, even sleeping with a pillow between her knees to try and alleviate the pressure, but nothing worked. She had even resorted to over-the-counter muscle relaxants, but they only offered temporary relief, and the cramps always came back. She was tired. Tired of the sleepless nights. Tired of the pain. And, most of all, tired of feeling powerless. As Sarah sat up in bed, rubbing her tired eyes, she felt a pang of guilt. She had always prided herself on being independent, on being able to take care of herself and her family. But this constant battle with leg cramps made her feel weak. Her body, once strong and capable, now seemed to be betraying her at every turn. And that thought, of losing control over her own body, scared her more than the cramps themselves. But just as she was about to sink back into despair, a thought crossed her mind. A conversation she'd had with her doctor earlier that week. Sarah, her doctor had said, his voice warm yet direct, leg cramps in seniors are more common than you might think. But don't worry. There are things we can do to help manage them. The doctor had gone on to mention how certain dietary changes could make a significant difference in preventing leg cramps. You'd be surprised how much of an impact the right foods can have on your muscle health, he had said. Sarah had been skeptical at first. After all, she tried everything from yoga to supplements, but nothing seemed to work. But something in her doctor's words had stuck with her. What if the answer wasn't just more pills or fancy treatments? What if the solution was simpler than that? What if the key to eliminating these cramps lay in the food she ate every day? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah wasn't ready to give up. Maybe the cramps had taken control of her nights, but she was determined not to let them take control of her life. She decided to dig deeper, to explore this idea that food could be a game changer. If she could find even a little relief, it would be worth it. With that thought in mind, Sarah reached for her phone and started researching. She learned that leg cramps in seniors could be caused by a number of factors, from dehydration to a lack of certain nutrients like potassium, magnesium, and calcium. She discovered that many foods, like bananas, leafy greens, and sweet potatoes, were packed with these nutrients and could help prevent muscle cramps. The more she read, the more intrigued she became. Could it be true? Could something as simple as changing her diet really make a difference? She didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. Sarah decided to take action. She would try it. She would give her body the best chance it had to heal, to get stronger, and to finally stop the constant pain of leg cramps. And so, with a sense of determination, she began her journey toward a new, healthier way of living. Her first step was to incorporate more potassium-rich foods into her diet. She went to the grocery store the next morning and filled her cart with bananas, spinach, and avocados. These were the foods her research had pointed to, and she was eager to see if they could help. She had no idea what the next few weeks would hold, but she was ready to try. As she left the store, her heart lifted slightly. She had no idea what she was about to discover, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let this struggle define her. She wasn't going to let leg cramps control her life any longer. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It never was. But for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she had a plan, a sense of direction. She was determined to fight back, not just against the cramps, but against the fear and frustration that had taken hold of her. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to live pain-free once again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah Davis had always been a fighter. Born and raised in a small town in Michigan, she grew up in a family that believed in hard work and perseverance. Her parents had always emphasized the importance of taking care of yourself, of pushing through challenges, and of never giving up, no matter the odds. Sarah had lived her life by these principles, and they had served her well. As a young woman, Sarah had excelled in everything she put her mind to. She was a natural leader, thriving in her academic and professional pursuits. After graduating from college with a degree in business, Sarah landed a job at a prestigious firm in Chicago. She climbed the corporate ladder quickly, her work ethic and determination earning her the respect of her colleagues and superiors. By the time she was 40, she had become a senior executive, managing a team of talented individuals, and she had built a comfortable, successful life. But success came at a cost. Sarah was always on the go. Work, family, and social obligations often left her with little time for herself. She rarely had time to relax, let alone focus on her own health. It wasn't until her mid-40s that Sarah began noticing the toll it was taking on her body. The late nights at the office, the constant stress, and the lack of exercise were starting to catch up with her. At first, it was just minor aches and pains, a stiff neck, sore shoulders, the occasional back discomfort. But as the years went by, the issues became more pronounced. Sarah started to feel tired more often, her energy levels dipping lower than they ever had before. And then came the leg cramps. It wasn't something she had expected. Her muscles, once strong and resilient from years of running, yoga, and hiking, seemed to be rebelling. The first cramp had struck out of nowhere, waking her up in the middle of the night with a sharp, jarring pain in her calf. At first, she thought it was a fluke, but the cramps returned again and again, leaving her frustrated and exhausted. Her life was no longer the bustling, busy whirlwind it had once been. Instead, it had become a series of painful, sleepless nights, filled with worry and fatigue. She had tried all the usual remedies, stretching, drinking more water, using heating pads, but nothing seemed to work. The cramps only seemed to worsen. As Sarah lay in bed, reflecting on the past few months, she realized how much they had affected her. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on being the one who took care of everyone else. She had raised 2 children, a son and a daughter, both of whom were now adults and pursuing their own dreams. She had a wonderful marriage to Tom, her supportive husband of 40 years. But lately, Sarah had begun to feel like a burden. The cramps had begun to affect her ability to keep up with her daily routine, and she hated that feeling. She could no longer walk as far as she used to, let alone take those long hikes she'd once loved. Exercise felt like a distant memory. And more than anything, the pain of the leg cramps reminded her that she was getting older, that her body wasn't what it used to be. It was a hard pill to swallow. Yet, in her heart, Sarah knew that she wasn't ready to give in. Her drive had always pushed her to face challenges head-on, and now, she was determined to face this new battle with the same tenacity. It was in the middle of one of these painful nights that Sarah's mind started to wander. Maybe the answer wasn't just about taking painkillers or trying yet another over-the-counter remedy. Maybe, just maybe, the solution lay in something simpler, something that she could control. What if she could use food to help her body heal? What if a few adjustments to her diet could make all the difference? It was this thought that began to shape Sarah's determination. She wasn't going to let leg cramps dictate her life. She was going to find a way to strengthen her legs and regain control over her health. But before she could begin making changes, she knew she had to confront her own feelings of vulnerability. She had spent so many years being the rock for everyone else, her kids, her husband, her colleagues, that she had never really stopped to care for herself in the way she needed. Now, it was her turn to take care of her own health, and that meant embracing change. The first step on that journey was accepting the reality of her situation. She wasn't invincible. She was human. And her body needed attention and care, just like anyone else's. Her next challenge would be figuring out what that care looked like. It wasn't going to be easy. It never was. But for Sarah, it was time to begin the work of reclaiming her strength, starting with something as simple, yet powerful, as food. Sarah had always prided herself on her independence. She had taken care of everything, the kids, the house, her career, and even Tom when he needed support. But now, it felt like her body was betraying her. The cramps had started off as a nuisance, something she could shrug off. But as the weeks passed, they had grown more frequent, more intense, and far harder to ignore. One night, after yet another cramp had jolted her awake, Sarah sat up in bed, massaging her aching calf, trying to will the pain away. The clock on her nightstand flashed 3:30 a.m. She had barely slept in the last few days, and the exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. Her muscles were sore, and the lack of rest was affecting her mood. Tom, her husband, had tried to comfort her, but there wasn't much he could do. The cramps were something only she could truly understand, something only she could feel. "Maybe you should see a doctor about it," Tom suggested gently one morning over breakfast. "I've been to the doctor, Tom," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "They say it's just something that happens with age. That's all. They gave me some vitamins and told me to drink more water. But it's not enough. The cramps are getting worse. I don't know what else to do." She had always been the type to handle things herself, but for the first time, she felt powerless. It was as if her body had taken on a life of its own, rebelling against her efforts to stay strong. Sarah had always been able to tackle problems head-on, but this was different. The pain felt like an invisible enemy, unpredictable and unrelenting. Later that week, Sarah scheduled a follow-up appointment with her doctor. She arrived at the clinic, feeling a mix of hope and skepticism. She was hoping for answers, real answers, not just a prescription for something temporary. The doctor, Dr. Reynolds, had been kind and understanding during her last visit, but this time, Sarah was ready for something more concrete. "Dr. Reynolds, the cramps haven't stopped," Sarah said as soon as she sat down in his office. "In fact, they've gotten worse. I've tried everything, stretching, using heat pads, drinking more water, but nothing works. I'm starting to feel like I'm losing control." Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. He looked at Sarah with genuine concern, a kind of understanding that made her feel heard, even if there was no immediate solution. "I understand, Sarah," he said. "Leg cramps in seniors are very common, and they can have a number of causes. It could be related to a lack of certain nutrients, like potassium or magnesium, which are vital for muscle function. And sometimes dehydration plays a role, too. Have you looked into changing your diet at all? I'm not talking about drastic changes, but adding in foods that are rich in these nutrients might help." Sarah frowned. She had heard people talk about food and diet before, but it always seemed like something out of reach. She had tried to eat healthily, but honestly, her meals often consisted of whatever was easiest after a long day at work or between family obligations. Could something as simple as changing what she ate really make a difference? "I'll try it," Sarah said, her voice determined but uncertain. "I'll give it a shot." Dr. Reynolds smiled. "Great. And remember, it's not just about the food. Staying hydrated and taking time to relax are just as important. These changes will take time, but you might start feeling better in a few weeks. As Sarah left the doctor's office, she couldn't help but wonder if this would actually work. The thought of changing her diet seemed so simple, yet so daunting at the same time. What exactly should she eat? How would she know what worked? And what about all the habits she'd built up over the years? Would she really be able to change them? Sarah wasn't one to give up easily. She'd faced countless challenges before, from managing high-stress projects at work to raising her children while keeping up with her busy life. But this felt like an entirely different challenge. It wasn't just about tackling a work problem or organizing a family event. This was about changing the very way she nourished her body. Over the next few days, Sarah did some research. She found that leg cramps could indeed be related to a lack of certain nutrients. Potassium, magnesium, and calcium were vital for muscle function, and deficiencies in these minerals could cause cramps. She was intrigued. Perhaps her body wasn't just asking for more rest or medication, it was asking for the right kind of fuel. Sarah also learned that dehydration could exacerbate muscle cramps. That was a wake-up call. She had always been terrible about drinking water, especially since she'd been so busy. Maybe this was another piece of the puzzle. The next weekend, Sarah went to the grocery store and loaded up on foods that were rich in potassium, magnesium, and calcium. She picked out bananas, spinach, sweet potatoes, and avocados. She grabbed a few cans of coconut water, too, after reading about its hydrating benefits. When she got home, she felt a sense of purpose. She was taking control, doing something positive for her body. But the question still lingered in her mind, would it actually work? She started incorporating these new foods into her meals the very next day. She added a banana to her morning oatmeal, tossed spinach into her salads, and baked sweet potatoes for dinner. She made sure to drink more water throughout the day and tried to be more mindful about staying hydrated. However, as Sarah sat down to dinner on the third evening, she still wasn't sure if any of this would really help. The cramps had been so persistent, so strong, that it felt almost impossible to believe that food could make a difference. But then again, she had nothing to lose. She wasn't about to just give up. Later that night, Sarah tried to stay calm, telling herself that it would take time. She didn't want to be discouraged after just a few days. If there was even a chance that these changes could help, she needed to give it a fair shot. The night passed without incident, and Sarah tried not to get her hopes up. But as she lay in bed, her mind wandered. Could it really be this simple? Could food, and a little more hydration, be the key to ending the leg cramps that had stolen her nights? For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. The next day would be the test. Would the cramps continue? Or would Sarah start to feel like herself again? It had been a week since Sarah had started incorporating the foods recommended by Dr. Reynolds into her diet. As she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying a little bit of makeup before heading out for the day, she noticed something. It was subtle, but it was there. The faintest hint of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, her legs didn't feel quite so tight. The familiar dull ache in her calves was noticeably reduced. She couldn't believe it. Just a few days ago, she had been waking up in the middle of the night, clutching her leg in agony. Now, she felt different. It was as if a weight had been lifted, even if just a little. Sarah had always been skeptical of quick fixes, and she certainly wasn't the type to get her hopes up too easily. But this was different. Something was shifting within her body. She couldn't deny it. It wasn't just the food. Sarah had also started drinking more water. Every day, she made a conscious effort to sip on coconut water throughout the day, along with the recommended 8 glasses of regular water. She had even started to feel a little more energized, the sluggishness that had plagued her for months finally beginning to lift. She could feel the hydration working its magic in ways she hadn't expected. After her morning routine, Sarah decided to take a walk around the block. Her legs had felt stiff the previous week, but today, there was more spring in her step. She wasn't running a marathon or anything, but the simple act of walking felt easier than it had in ages. As she strolled, Sarah reflected on how far she had come in just a short amount of time. She had started this journey as a woman who felt defeated by her body, who had resigned herself to the idea that leg cramps were just another unfortunate part of aging. But now, there was a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in months. The cramps hadn't disappeared completely, but the frequency and intensity had decreased. Her mind felt clearer, and her body felt stronger. When she returned home, she noticed that Tom had set the table for breakfast. He was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes, a warm smile on his face when he saw her. "How was your walk?" he asked, his voice soft and gentle. "It was great," Sarah replied, sitting down at the table. "I didn't feel as stiff as I usually do. In fact, I think I might be getting the hang of this whole eating better thing. Maybe there's something to this whole food for cramps idea after all." Tom chuckled. "I'm glad to hear it. You've been through a lot with those cramps. It's good to see you finding some relief." "Thanks, Tom. Honestly, I wasn't sure if this was going to work. But the more I think about it, the more I realize how much my body had been crying out for these nutrients." They ate breakfast together, and Sarah made a mental note to check in with herself at the end of the week. She wasn't expecting a miracle, but the subtle changes were starting to add up. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something bigger than just getting rid of cramps. This was about reclaiming her health, and her sense of well-being. But even as Sarah felt the relief, there was a part of her that was cautiously optimistic. She knew this wasn't the end of the road. She still had a lot to learn about how food impacted her body, and she had to make sure that this wasn't just a fleeting improvement. That afternoon, Sarah decided to take her research a little further. She started reading more about the role of magnesium, potassium, and calcium in muscle function. The more she learned, the more fascinated she became. These nutrients weren't just important for preventing cramps, they were essential for overall muscle health, nerve function, and even bone strength. She realized that she had been neglecting these vital nutrients for too long, choosing convenience over the quality of what she put into her body. As the days went on, Sarah found herself making more changes. She was making smoothies in the mornings, packed with spinach, bananas, and almond milk, each one filled with the minerals her body had been craving. For lunch, she would prepare a salad with leafy greens, avocado, and some lean protein. Dinner was often a simple affair, grilled chicken with sweet potatoes, maybe some roasted broccoli on the side. It wasn't just about the food, though. It was about how she was starting to feel about herself. She had always been so focused on her career, her family, and the daily grind that she hadn't given herself the time or attention she needed. Now, she was learning to prioritize herself, even if it was just in small, everyday ways. The act of nourishing her body wasn't just about feeding herself, it was about taking ownership of her health and her happiness. One evening, after a satisfying dinner, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Her body had been through so much, yet it was beginning to respond. The cramps hadn't completely vanished, but they were a far cry from the agonizing episodes she had endured in the past. "Tom," Sarah said as they sat together on the couch, her feet propped up on the coffee table, "I'm feeling better. Not perfect, but better. And I'm starting to think that maybe this is just the beginning of something new. Maybe this is about more than just getting rid of the cramps. It's about taking control of my health in a way I haven't before." Tom looked at her with a proud smile. "I'm really proud of you, Sarah. You're doing this. I knew you'd find a way to take charge. It's inspiring." As Sarah sat there, basking in the warmth of Tom's support, she realized that this wasn't just a physical journey. It was emotional, too. She had spent so many years ignoring her own needs, always putting others first. Now, for the first time in a long while, she was learning to put herself at the top of her list. She wasn't just trying to eliminate leg cramps anymore. She was learning how to live better, how to nourish her body, and most importantly, how to honor herself. It had been a month since Sarah had started her new regimen. Every day, she felt stronger, more energized. The muscle cramps had continued to improve, although they weren't entirely gone. She had learned that healing wasn't an overnight process, but every small victory felt like progress. And that, for Sarah, was enough to keep moving forward. But one Thursday evening, as she was preparing dinner for the family, something unexpected happened. Her legs felt stiff again. The familiar ache in her calves began to creep back, spreading through her muscles like a tight knot. It was more intense this time, sharper. Her body had been feeling so good lately that the return of the cramps hit her harder than she anticipated. Tom was in the living room, reading the newspaper, while the kids were upstairs finishing their homework. Sarah stood still in the kitchen, her hand gripping the counter as she tried to massage her calf, but nothing seemed to help. Her mind raced. What had gone wrong? She had been so careful with her diet, drinking the recommended amounts of water, eating potassium-rich foods like bananas and avocados, and making time for rest. Why was this happening again? Frustration washed over her. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She thought she was on the right track, that the cramps were a thing of the past, or at least something manageable. But this setback felt like a punch in the gut. Sarah had worked so hard, and yet here she was, facing the same problem once more. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The tension in her body didn't ease, but she knew she had to stay calm. She couldn't afford to give up now, not when she had come so far. Tom entered the kitchen, sensing her distress. "Sarah, are you okay?" I don't know," she stammered, blinking back tears. "It's happening again. The cramps. They're back." Tom's face softened with concern. "I thought things were getting better. What do you think it is?" "I don't know, Tom," Sarah replied, her voice shaky. "I've been doing everything right. I've been eating the right foods, drinking water, trying to stay active. I don't understand. It's like my body is betraying me." Her frustration was palpable, and for a moment, she felt the weight of years of trying to maintain control of her health, her family, and her life. Every effort she made, every change she embraced, had led her to this moment, this painful reminder that even when you try your best, things don't always work out the way you hope. Tom stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, you've been doing amazing. It's normal to have some setbacks. You can't expect everything to change overnight. It's about the long-term journey, not a quick fix." Sarah blinked, looking up at him. His words were like a balm to her wounded spirit. She had been so focused on the immediate results, wanting instant relief. But maybe this journey wasn't about quick fixes at all. Maybe it was about being patient, trusting the process, and giving her body the time it needed to heal in its own way. "But I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong," Sarah murmured. "I feel like I'm doing everything right, and still, these cramps keep happening." Tom smiled softly, his eyes kind. "Maybe it's not about doing something wrong, but rather about learning to listen to your body in a new way. You're in the process of healing. Healing isn't linear, it's not always a straight path. It's okay to have setbacks. The important thing is that you keep moving forward." Sarah took a moment to absorb his words. She realized that she had been so focused on immediate results that she had forgotten the bigger picture. This wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. Healing wasn't just about fixing the cramps, it was about taking care of herself, nourishing her body, and learning to live with patience and self-compassion. Her eyes filled with tears, not of frustration this time, but of relief. She had been so hard on herself. She had expected everything to work perfectly, to be cured instantly. But now, with Tom's gentle reminder, she realized that there was no magic pill for what she was experiencing. She was healing, not just physically, but emotionally, too. The cramps still ached, but they no longer felt like a personal failure. They were just part of the process, part of the journey to better health, both inside and out. The next day, Sarah went for her morning walk. Her legs were sore, but she felt a renewed sense of clarity. The pain was still there, but she wasn't going to let it control her. She wasn't going to let one setback erase all the progress she had made. She had learned something powerful: healing wasn't about a destination, it was about the journey. And that journey was worth every step. That afternoon, as she prepared her lunch, she paused for a moment and thought about all the things she had learned over the past month. She had discovered that the body's need for nourishment wasn't just about filling the stomach, it was about filling the soul. The changes she had made weren't just physical, they had affected her entire outlook on life. For the first time in a long time, she felt empowered. Sarah didn't have all the answers yet. She still had a long way to go, and there were no guarantees that her cramps would completely disappear. But she was no longer focused on the idea of perfection. Instead, she was embracing the idea of progress, of learning to care for herself in a way that she had never allowed herself to before. As she sat down to eat, she realized that this journey was more than just about overcoming leg cramps. It was about taking back control of her life, reclaiming her health, and learning to be patient with herself. It was about being okay with the setbacks, the challenges, and the imperfections. And in that moment, Sarah knew that she was on the right path. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the weeks passed, Sarah continued to evolve, both physically and mentally. Her leg cramps didn't completely vanish, but they became more manageable, less frequent, and less intense. She had learned to listen to her body, recognizing the signals it sent her, whether it was a need for hydration, rest, or a particular nutrient. She had gained a new understanding of how her body worked, and more importantly, how she could nurture it. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in the kitchen with a cup of herbal tea, she reflected on her journey so far. The cramps were no longer the overwhelming force they had once been. She still had occasional flare-ups, but they didn't dominate her life the way they used to. The real change had come in her attitude, toward her body, toward her health, and toward herself. A small smile tugged at her lips as she thought about the conversation she had had with Tom weeks ago when she had felt like a failure. Back then, she had believed that every setback meant she wasn't doing enough, that her efforts were futile. But now, she understood something different. She had learned to let go of the pressure to be perfect. Sarah's eyes turned to the small notebook where she had written down her health goals. At first, it had been a list of foods, exercises, and vitamins she thought would help. Now, it was filled with reflections on her journey, how she felt, the small victories she had celebrated, and the setbacks she had learned from. Each page felt like a new chapter, a reminder that change wasn't an event, but a process. She had also begun to prioritize self-care in other ways. No longer just focused on eating right and drinking enough water, she had integrated other habits into her routine. She started to meditate for 5 minutes each morning, taking time to center herself before starting her day. She took walks regularly, but not just for exercise. She used the time to clear her mind, to breathe in the fresh air, and to simply be present. She had learned to embrace rest, to acknowledge when her body needed it without guilt. Tom had noticed the change in her, too. He no longer saw the fatigue and frustration that used to weigh her down. Instead, he saw a woman who was finding balance in her life, someone who was learning to prioritize her well-being. He had been supportive from the beginning, but lately, he had noticed a shift in her energy. Sarah seemed lighter, more peaceful, and that had brought a sense of calm to their home. One evening, as they sat on the porch together watching the sunset, Sarah spoke up. "You know," she began, "I've been thinking a lot about this journey I've been on. It's not just about the cramps anymore, it's about so much more. It's about listening to my body, about not expecting instant results, but trusting the process." Tom turned toward her, his face warm with affection. "You've come a long way, Sarah. I'm proud of you." You've been through a lot, and you're stronger for it. Not just physically, but emotionally, too. Sarah nodded. I've realized something. When I was younger, I thought I had to do everything perfectly. If I didn't, it meant I was failing. But now, I've learned that life isn't about perfection. It's about progress. It's about doing the best I can each day, even if that means taking small steps. Tom smiled. And you've been doing that every day. You're not just taking care of your body, you're taking care of yourself. That's the most important thing. Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude. She had learned so much in the past few months. Not just about the foods that helped her body, but about the mindset that had held her back for so long. She had always been focused on achieving goals, crossing items off lists, and reaching a perfect outcome. But now, she realized that life was about enjoying the journey, no matter how messy or imperfect it might be. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she thought back on everything she had been through, the pain, the frustration, the setbacks. It had been a tough road, but each bump had led her to where she was now. She no longer felt like she was fighting against her body. Instead, she felt like she was working with it. It was no longer a battle, it was a partnership. She had learned that true healing came from within, from giving herself the space to grow, to adjust, and to forgive herself when things didn't go as planned. She thought about the foods she had incorporated into her diet: potassium-rich bananas, magnesium-loaded spinach, calcium-packed dairy. These foods had helped her body in ways she hadn't fully understood at first. But now, she recognized them as part of a greater whole, a greater approach to taking care of herself, inside and out. Sarah realized that her journey was far from over. She would continue to learn and grow, to nourish her body and mind. There would still be moments of difficulty, times when the cramps would return or when life would throw unexpected challenges her way. But now, she felt equipped to handle whatever came her way. She knew that every challenge was an opportunity to grow stronger, to deepen her understanding of herself, and to continue moving forward. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to relax, finally at peace with her journey. She had come to terms with the fact that she didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to have all the answers. She just needed to keep going, one step at a time, trusting that the process would take her exactly where she needed to go. And with that, Sarah drifted off to sleep, feeling a sense of contentment that she hadn't known in years. Sarah had come a long way since the first signs of her leg cramps. She had made significant changes to her lifestyle, improved her diet, integrated more movement into her daily routine, and learned to rest without guilt. But no sooner had she begun to feel confident in her progress than life decided to throw her a curveball. It started with a phone call on a Monday morning. Sarah was in the middle of preparing a healthy breakfast when her phone rang. It was from the clinic where she had been getting her regular checkups. The receptionist's voice was calm, but the message behind it was clear. Ms. Evans, we've received the results from your recent blood tests. Your calcium levels are a little low, and we'd like you to come in for a follow-up appointment as soon as possible. The words hit her like a thunderclap. Low calcium. She thought she had been doing everything right, eating calcium-rich foods like dairy, leafy greens, and fortified plant-based alternatives. She had even been diligent about taking supplements, as her doctor had recommended. How could her levels still be low? She hung up the phone, feeling a familiar knot in her stomach. For a moment, her mind spiraled into self-doubt. Was her body betraying her again? She had worked so hard to improve her health, to take control of her well-being. Now, this new challenge felt like a setback, an obstacle she wasn't sure how to overcome. But then, she took a deep breath and remembered what she had learned in the past months. This wasn't about perfection. It was about progress, about learning from the challenges that came her way. She couldn't control everything, but she could control how she responded. And she wasn't going to let this new test defeat her. After the call, Sarah spent the day reflecting on her calcium intake. She realized that despite her best efforts, she might not have been absorbing enough calcium due to a number of factors: her body's individual needs, her diet not being as balanced as she thought, or even certain habits that could be interfering with absorption. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that calcium wasn't just a one-time fix. It was a constant process of nourishing and supporting her body in the right ways. That night, Sarah sat down with a cup of tea and researched everything she could about calcium absorption. She learned that magnesium and vitamin D were crucial partners in helping the body absorb calcium properly. She had been diligent with her magnesium intake, but she realized she could improve her vitamin D levels, which were naturally lower during the colder months, especially with her time indoors. The next day, Sarah began adjusting her approach. She added more vitamin D-rich foods to her meals, such as salmon, egg yolks, and fortified cereals. She started taking a daily vitamin D supplement as well, determined to improve her body's ability to process calcium. Her next step was to consult her doctor about the potential need for a more personalized plan. She wanted to be sure that her calcium levels would increase without risking other imbalances. During her appointment, the doctor reassured her that these issues were common, especially as people got older. He prescribed a higher dose of calcium supplements and advised Sarah to increase her sun exposure as much as possible, another challenge, given the cold winter days ahead. But Sarah was undeterred. She understood now that every setback was just another lesson in the long journey of self-care. Rather than feeling defeated, she felt empowered. This new challenge didn't feel like a failure. It was simply another opportunity to learn, adapt, and do what was necessary to continue improving her health. Her doctor also reminded her that balance was key. Too much calcium could cause other health issues, so she would need to be mindful of the amounts she was consuming. This made Sarah realize how important it was to monitor her progress regularly, not just wait for signs of discomfort to prompt change. She needed to be proactive, to keep learning about her body's needs. As the weeks passed, Sarah diligently followed her new plan. She continued to focus on the foods that supported her calcium intake, but she also paid attention to how her body was responding. The cramps didn't return as intensely as they had before. She felt more energized, her bones less achy, and her overall health improving. Sarah also found herself feeling more confident, knowing that she was taking control of her health in a holistic way. One morning, as Sarah was walking her usual route around the neighborhood, she encountered a neighbor, Mrs. Hudson, who had recently mentioned her own struggles with leg cramps. Mrs. Hudson was in her early 70s and had been dealing with frequent muscle cramps and weakness for years. She had tried various remedies, but nothing seemed to work. "Good morning, Sarah." Mrs. Hudson called as Sarah passed her house. "How's the leg problem going?" "I've been meaning to ask." Sarah smiled, wiping the sweat from her brow. "It's getting better. I've made a few changes to my diet, and I'm focusing on foods that help with muscle health, like calcium, magnesium, and potassium." "That's interesting," Mrs. Hudson said, raising an eyebrow. "I've been taking my medication, but I don't think it's been enough. I might try what you're doing." Sarah nodded. "It's definitely been a journey. It's not about doing one thing perfectly, but about small changes over time. And staying consistent." Mrs. Hudson smiled knowingly. "Sounds like you've really figured it out. You've always been good about taking care of yourself. Maybe I could pick your brain sometime." "I'd love to help," Sarah replied. "It's all about finding what works for you, taking it slow, and not giving up when things don't improve right away." That conversation stuck with Sarah for the rest of the day. It was a reminder that the journey she was on wasn't just about her own well-being, it was about sharing the knowledge and experiences she had gained with others. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that helping others didn't just reinforce her own progress, it helped her stay motivated, too. As the weeks continued to pass, Sarah noticed something important: her life wasn't just about preventing leg cramps anymore. It was about fostering a sense of community, about being open with others about her struggles and triumphs. She realized that sharing her journey wasn't just therapeutic for herself. It could be the catalyst for someone else's change, too. The following months brought new discoveries and a deeper understanding of Sarah's body, but they also revealed something else, how interconnected her well-being was with the people around her. As the seasons changed, Sarah became more aware of how easy it was to get lost in her own journey of self-improvement. There were days when she found herself preoccupied with meal planning, exercise routines, and her supplements. But something had shifted in her, something she had learned from the experiences of others. It had all started with her conversation with Mrs. Hudson. That morning had stuck with Sarah. She had realized that the wisdom she had gained over the past months could be just as valuable to others as it had been to her. More than that, the act of sharing her story had brought an unexpected sense of fulfillment. It had also made her more aware of the broader community around her, people who were likely going through similar struggles, people who could benefit from the knowledge she had acquired. At first, Sarah was hesitant. After all, she wasn't a health expert or a doctor, just someone who had learned through trial and error what worked for her. But she had been through enough to know that sometimes, it wasn't about having all the answers, it was about sharing what you knew and being open to learning from others in return. She began with small steps. She started by inviting Mrs. Hudson over for tea one afternoon to talk more about the food she had been incorporating into her diet. They shared recipes, stories about their health journeys, and discussed ways to keep their bodies strong and energized. A week later, Sarah's phone rang. It was her childhood friend, Emma, who had recently moved back to town after years of living abroad. Emma was in her late 40s and had started experiencing a number of health issues, including chronic pain and muscle cramps, which had started affecting her quality of life. "Sarah, I heard you've been feeling better, and I need some advice," Emma said, her voice tinged with frustration. "I've been to doctors, tried treatments, but nothing seems to help. I just don't know what to do anymore." Sarah immediately recognized the familiar tone of helplessness in Emma's voice. It was the same feeling she had experienced when the leg cramps first started, when the frustration of not finding a solution seemed all-consuming. "I know exactly how you feel," Sarah said gently. "But what I've learned is that sometimes, the answer isn't in a quick fix, it's in the small, consistent changes we make to our habits. I've been working on improving my diet and adding more nutrient-rich foods. Have you tried incorporating magnesium and calcium-rich foods into your meals?" Emma paused for a moment, considering the idea. "I've never really thought about it that way, but it sounds like it could help. Can you share some of the things you've been eating?" Sarah quickly shared a list of foods that had helped her: spinach, bananas, dairy products, and nuts, among others. She also explained the importance of staying hydrated, getting adequate rest, and managing stress. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew that sharing what had worked for her could be a start. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll give it a try," Emma replied, a sense of hope in her voice. "I've been so caught up in trying to find a single magic solution. Maybe what I need is a more balanced approach." Over the next few weeks, Sarah continued to connect with her friends, family, and neighbors. She found that people were more open than she had expected to talk about their own health struggles, especially when it came to issues that were often hidden or downplayed, like chronic pain or muscle cramps. It became clear that Sarah's journey had not only improved her health but also sparked a larger conversation about wellness in her community. One afternoon, after a walk through the neighborhood, Sarah found herself at a local cafe with a small group of women, including Mrs. Hudson, Emma, and a few other neighbors. They had all gathered to discuss their health struggles and share tips on managing pain, staying active, and living with more vitality. Sarah listened as one woman talked about how yoga had helped her manage stress and improve her flexibility. Another shared how mindfulness and breathing exercises had been crucial in reducing her muscle cramps. They all exchanged recipes, exercise tips, and personal stories about overcoming physical challenges. "Sarah, you've inspired us all," Mrs. Hudson said as she looked around at the group. "You took charge of your health, and we're all learning from your journey. This community, it feels like we're all in this together now." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was true, what had started as a solitary struggle was now becoming a collective experience. She realized that her journey wasn't just about overcoming leg cramps or improving her own health, it was about creating connections, supporting others, and fostering an environment where everyone could thrive together. That evening, after the group had dispersed, Sarah took a quiet moment to reflect on everything that had happened. Her health was continuing to improve, but more importantly, she had learned that true wellness didn't exist in isolation. It was about community, about leaning on others for support, offering help when possible, and being open to learning from each other. As she walked back home, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. The pain she had once felt in her legs had been the catalyst for something much greater, something that reached beyond her own body. It had taught her the power of community, of shared wisdom, and the strength that comes from working together. She thought back to her conversation with Tom not too long ago, when they had talked about the importance of relationships and mutual support. She had learned that being vulnerable and sharing her journey not only helped her, but it helped others, too. It was a reminder that we are never alone in our struggles, even when it feels like we are. Health and healing weren't just individual goals, they were collective, something that could be shared and embraced by everyone in a community. Sarah's journey was far from over, but she was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for those around her, too. And that made her feel stronger than ever. As Sarah's health continued to improve, she felt more confident than ever in her ability to manage her leg cramps. The pain that had once been a constant, nagging presence was now only an occasional annoyance. She felt stronger, more energized, and empowered by her journey of self-care and nutrition. Yet, as life often does, it threw her another curveball. One chilly morning in late fall, Sarah woke up feeling off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something felt different. Her legs were sore, and there was a dull ache in her muscles that wasn't typical. She brushed it off at first, attributing it to the colder weather and the change in seasons. But by mid-afternoon, the pain had intensified. It wasn't just in her legs, her joints were stiff, and she felt a low, persistent fatigue in her body. "I must be overdoing it," Sarah thought to herself. She had been pushing herself hard lately, between taking on new responsibilities at work, staying active with her exercise routines, and continuing to help others in her community. It was easy to let her self-care slip. She had been so focused on improving her health and sharing that knowledge with others that she had neglected her own needs. That evening, she took a warm bath and tried to relax. But the pain persisted, and her worry began to grow. Was this the beginning of another flare-up of leg cramps? Or was it something more serious? Sarah found herself doubting all the progress she had made. Could the changes she'd made to her diet and lifestyle really be enough to prevent these recurring issues? The next day, Sarah decided to visit her doctor for peace of mind. The visit brought mixed emotions. After a thorough examination and some additional tests, the doctor confirmed that her calcium levels were stable, and the cramps she had been experiencing were likely due to a combination of stress and overexertion. Sometimes, even the healthiest people can experience setbacks, the doctor explained. Your body is telling you it needs a break. You've made incredible progress, but you also need to listen when it's asking for rest. Sarah sighed in relief, but there was also a tinge of frustration. How could she have missed the signs? Why had she pushed herself so hard when she knew the importance of balance? She left the doctor's office with a sense of disappointment, but also with a renewed commitment to take better care of herself. The message was clear: health wasn't just about eating the right foods or exercising, it was about recognizing when to slow down, listen to her body, and allow herself the rest she deserved. When Sarah got home, she sat down with a cup of tea and reflected on the situation. The truth was, she had been burning the candle at both ends. Even though her physical health was improving, she had failed to account for the mental and emotional toll of constantly giving to others. She had been so focused on supporting her friends and neighbors that she had neglected to check in with herself. That evening, as Sarah was preparing a simple, nourishing meal. Roasted chicken with sweet potatoes and spinach, a go-to recipe that always made her feel grounded. She took a moment to journal. Writing had always helped her process her emotions, and tonight, she felt the need to dig deep. "I've been so focused on helping others that I've forgotten to give myself the grace I deserve. I thought I could do it all, exercise, eat well, help my friends. But I see now that it's okay to slow down sometimes. In fact, it's necessary. Maybe I'm learning the most important lesson of all. Self-care isn't just about what I eat or how I move, it's about taking time to rest, recharge, and be gentle with myself. I can't pour from an empty cup." The next few days were a reminder of how important it was to rest and take breaks. Sarah made it a priority to schedule more downtime into her routine, moments where she could just be still. She found comfort in slow walks through the park, meditation sessions in the mornings, and even taking naps when she felt her body needed them. Instead of pushing herself harder, she learned to honor her body's need for rest and recovery. It was also a time for reflection. During her self-imposed break, Sarah reached out to her community again, but this time, the conversation was different. She spoke not only about the importance of healthy foods and exercise but also about the need for balance, about taking time to rest, to say no when necessary, and to be kind to oneself. "Sometimes we think that the more we do, the more we accomplish," she told a group of friends at the cafe one morning. But in reality, the key to health isn't just about what we can do, it's about knowing when to stop and take care of ourselves. Rest is just as important as any workout or meal. Her words resonated deeply with her friends, many of whom had been caught up in the same cycle of overexertion and burnout. They had been pushing themselves to maintain their busy lives without giving themselves permission to rest. It was a conversation that needed to happen, and Sarah was glad she could be part of it. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah felt her body slowly recovering. The aches and pains faded, and her energy began to return. But more than that, she felt a deeper sense of peace and understanding. She realized that health wasn't about perfection, it was about progress, balance, and listening to the signals your body gave you. It was also a reminder that setbacks weren't failures, they were simply part of the journey. Sarah knew that life would always throw challenges her way, but she had learned how to face them with grace and resilience. Every challenge, whether big or small, was an opportunity to grow, to become more aware of her needs, and to embrace the ebb and flow of life. In the following weeks, as Sarah continued to make adjustments to her routine, she shared her experience with her community, reminding them that even on the road to recovery, there would be setbacks. But each time, they could choose to rise again, to keep learning, and to keep moving forward, even if it meant taking a step back first. As Sarah entered the new year, she couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The earlier setbacks had taught her valuable lessons, and now, with the spring months ahead, she was eager to apply what she had learned. Her leg cramps, once an omnipresent reminder of her struggles, were becoming fewer and farther between. But Sarah knew that the true challenge was in maintaining her progress. The real test, she understood now, wasn't just about overcoming obstacles. It was about building a routine that could sustain her health for the long term. It was about consistency. With this in mind, Sarah created a new routine, a daily rhythm that incorporated everything she had learned and worked toward over the past year. It wasn't about perfection, it was about creating a sustainable lifestyle that supported both her physical and mental well-being. The routines she had once approached with urgency now felt more like an act of self-respect. Her mornings had become sacred. She woke up earlier than she had before, to give herself time to center herself before the demands of the day set in. She began each day with a 5-minute meditation session, allowing herself to breathe deeply and set her intentions for the day. This small ritual was a calming start, grounding her as she moved into the rest of her routine. Next came her morning walk, which had become one of her favorite parts of the day. Walking, she had learned, was more than just a physical exercise, it was a mental reset. The quiet moments in nature, even if it was just around her neighborhood, gave her space to reflect and reconnect with herself. During these walks, she had made it a habit to call her mother and check in. They had always shared a special bond, and this new tradition helped them stay connected, even in the midst of their busy lives. Breakfast followed, and Sarah had found the perfect balance between nutrition and simplicity. She often enjoyed a bowl of oatmeal with chia seeds, fresh fruit, and a sprinkle of cinnamon. It was rich in fiber, antioxidants, and healthy fats, just the kind of meal that fueled her body and kept her legs strong throughout the day. However, one thing Sarah learned through this process was that healthy eating didn't mean rigidly following a prescribed diet. It meant making choices that nurtured her body and kept her energized. There were still days when she indulged in her favorite chocolate or treated herself to a cup of coffee with friends. Balance was key, and she had learned to appreciate the joy that these occasional treats brought. Work was another area where Sarah had made significant changes. She had stopped overcommitting herself to extra projects and long hours. Instead, she focused on prioritizing the tasks that truly mattered and gave herself permission to step back when necessary. Learning to say no, without guilt, had been a powerful step in creating a healthier work-life balance. In the afternoons, Sarah would spend time preparing healthy meals for the week, a habit that had made a tremendous difference in her ability to stay on track. She had learned the value of meal prep, knowing that having nutritious options readily available prevented her from reaching for unhealthy snacks or relying on fast food. By this point, she had become well-versed in preparing dishes that supported her health goals: roasted vegetables, lean proteins, hearty salads, and whole grains. She also made sure to incorporate plenty of magnesium and potassium-rich foods into her meals. Spinach, bananas, sweet potatoes, and almonds became staples in her diet. She had even started experimenting with new recipes, delighting in the way certain foods made her feel stronger, both physically and emotionally. In the evenings, Sarah spent time reflecting on her day. Journaling had become a consistent practice that allowed her to process her thoughts, challenges, and triumphs. It was also a time for gratitude. As she wrote, she'd list 3 things she was thankful for, whether it was the quiet morning walk, a productive day at work, or the laughter she shared with friends. These moments of gratitude kept her grounded and reminded her of how far she had come. But perhaps the most important lesson Sarah had learned was that consistency didn't mean rigidity. It meant being flexible and kind to yourself, even when life didn't go as planned. There were still days when she felt fatigued or when unexpected stressors disrupted her routine. But rather than berate herself, Sarah had learned to take those moments in stride. She knew that the path to health wasn't a straight line, it was a winding road filled with both challenges and triumphs. One day, as Sarah sat on the porch sipping tea, watching the sun set over the horizon, she reflected on how much had changed. The leg cramps, which once ruled her life, were now a distant memory. The physical strength she had built, through the right foods, the right exercise, and a consistent routine, was now the foundation of her daily existence. But the real transformation had been in her mindset. She had learned not just to fight against her body's limitations but to embrace the wisdom it had to offer. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah couldn't help but smile. She was no longer on a quest for perfection. She had found her rhythm, a sustainable, healthy routine that honored her body's needs and allowed her to thrive. Her journey had taught her that the key to long-term health wasn't about perfection, it was about building a life that allowed her to feel strong, vibrant, and whole. And in that moment, Sarah understood something fundamental. She wasn't just building a life that would prevent leg cramps. She was building a life that allowed her to live with purpose, balance, and joy. As the months went by, Sarah's health continued to flourish, and with it, her sense of purpose. She had not only transformed her physical well-being but had also unlocked a deeper understanding of herself. Looking back, the pain she once felt in her legs had become a distant memory. Now, it was replaced with a strength and energy that permeated every aspect of her life. Her journey had started with a simple desire to get rid of leg cramps, but it had evolved into so much more. It had become a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and the power of consistency. But Sarah knew that the true essence of her transformation was not just in how her body had healed, but in how she had learned to nurture every part of herself, physically, mentally, and emotionally. One afternoon, as Sarah was preparing a batch of her favorite homemade granola, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her longtime friend, Claire. "Sarah, I need your help. I'm feeling so overwhelmed, and my health isn't what it used to be. You've been through so much, you seem to have it all figured out. How did you do it?" Sarah paused for a moment, feeling a mix of emotions. Her heart warmed, knowing that her journey had inspired others. But she also felt a deep responsibility to share everything she had learned, to help others who might be facing similar struggles. The truth was, it hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when it felt like progress was slow. But Sarah knew, more than ever, that the key was consistency, balance, and self-compassion. That evening, Sarah called Claire. As they chatted, Sarah shared the lessons she had learned along her journey. She spoke of the importance of eating the right foods, of creating a routine that nourished both body and soul, and of the necessity of listening to one's body when it needed rest. She reminded Claire that health wasn't about achieving perfection, it was about progress. It was about showing up for yourself every day, even when it felt difficult. "You don't have to do it all at once," Sarah told her. "Start small. One step at a time. And be patient with yourself. Health isn't a race, it's a lifelong journey." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a renewed sense of gratitude. She had learned so much along the way, and now, she was able to pass on that knowledge. Helping Claire gave her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't anticipated. It reminded her of the importance of community and connection. Her own transformation wasn't just for her, it was to be shared, so others could embark on their own healing journeys. But there was something else Sarah had learned throughout this process. Life was unpredictable. While she had made tremendous strides, she knew that there would be more challenges ahead. There would be moments when she felt unsteady, and times when the routine she had worked so hard to create might be disrupted. But Sarah was no longer afraid of those moments. She knew they were a part of the journey. She also knew that it was okay to have setbacks. The key was not to give up, not to become disheartened. She had discovered a deep well of inner strength she hadn't known existed. That strength wasn't just in her physical body, but in her ability to adapt, to grow, and to keep moving forward, even when things weren't perfect. Sarah's relationship with her health had shifted. It was no longer about avoiding leg cramps, or simply following a prescribed routine. It was about living a life that honored her whole self. It was about creating a balance that allowed her to thrive, to support others, and to keep evolving. As the spring days turned into summer, Sarah spent more time outdoors, gardening and walking through the parks. She felt a deep connection to the world around her, the sun on her skin, the sound of birds singing, the soft breeze against her face. She had learned to appreciate these small, beautiful moments that once seemed so ordinary. One evening, as Sarah sat on her porch watching the sunset, she reflected on everything that had led her to this point. She had started her journey feeling defeated, unsure if she could ever overcome the challenges of chronic leg cramps. But now, she was a different person, a person who had not only conquered her physical struggles but had learned the true meaning of health and wellness. Her story, once filled with uncertainty, had become one of hope. It was proof that healing was possible, that it wasn't about being perfect, but about being persistent. It was about choosing to live with intention, to make decisions that honored the body and mind. And above all, it was about recognizing that health wasn't a destination, it was a journey, one that would continue to unfold as long as she was willing to walk it. Life is full of surprises, Sarah thought to herself, smiling as she looked at the horizon. But as long as I stay true to myself, I know I'll always have the strength to face whatever comes my way. And with that, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. She was ready for whatever the future held, confident in her ability to navigate the ups and downs, knowing that her health and well-being were in her hands. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?